The bullet that grazed Xander Callahan's ribs in the summer of 1878 hadn't killed him, but the screaming of dying men still echoed in his skull 2 years later as he rode into Prescott, Arizona, with nothing but a tired horse and a promise to himself that he would never pick up a gun for another man's cause again. And he would certainly never let another woman carve her initials into what remained of his heart. The town sprawled across the high desert plateau, pine-covered mountains rising in the distance, a sight that should have been peaceful but only reminded Xander of how far he had come from the Virginia farm, where he had been born 28 years ago. Prescott was growing, buildings rising up along Montezuma Street and Whiskey Row, the sound of hammers and saws mixing with the laughter spilling from saloons even at midday. He had chosen this place specifically because nobody knew him here, because he could disappear into the work of ranching and forget that he had once been a soldier, once been a man foolish enough to believe in causes and promises whispered in the dark. He guided his horse toward the livery stable, his body aching from 3 weeks on the trail. The owner, a grizzled man missing 2 fingers on his left hand, took his money without much conversation, which suited Xander fine. He had stopped at the land office before coming here, secured papers for a small spread about 10 miles north of town. Nothing fancy, but enough to run cattle and live alone. The solitude was the point. Xander was securing his saddlebags over his shoulder when he heard the commotion down the street. His first instinct was to ignore it, keep walking, but the sharp cry of a woman's voice cut through the afternoon air, and his feet stopped moving despite his better judgment. "I said let go of my arm." The voice was clear, educated, furious. Xander turned to see a crowd gathering outside the Wells Fargo office. Through the gaps between onlookers, he glimpsed a woman in a dark green traveling dress struggling against a large man in a dusty suit who had her by the wrist. Another man, this one wearing a deputy's badge, stood nearby with his arms crossed, watching but not intervening. "Walk away," Xander told himself. "This is not your fight." You swore off fighting, but his boots carried him forward anyway, pushing through the crowd until he could see the scene clearly. The woman was young, maybe 24 or 25, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a small hat that had been knocked askew in the struggle. Her face was flushed with anger and something that might have been fear, though she was hiding it well. The man holding her was twice her size, his face red and sweating. "You owe me, Miss Reynolds," the large man was saying, his voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Your father borrowed $500 and now he's dead, which means the debt falls to you." "I don't owe you anything, Mr. Garrett," the woman shot back. "That money was for a business investment that you never delivered on. If anything, you owe my father's estate." "Your father's estate," Garrett laughed, a cruel sound. "Your father died with nothing but debts. This whole town knows it. Now you either pay me what's owed or we can work out another arrangement." The implication in his tone made Xander's jaw tighten. The deputy still had not moved. "I have documentation," the woman insisted, trying to pull free. "Letters from my father detailing your fraud. If you don't release me, I will have you brought up on charges." Garrett's grip tightened and she winced. "Those letters don't mean nothing when Judge Harrison and I play cards every Thursday. Now stop making a scene." Xander stepped forward before he could stop himself. "The lady asked you to let go." Every eye in the crowd turned to him. Garrett looked him up and down, taking in the trail dust, the worn gun belt, the hard planes of Xander's face that spoke of years spent outdoors and in harder places than this street corner. "This is not your concern, stranger," Garrett said. "I am making it my concern." Xander's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. He had not wanted to do this, had promised himself he would not get involved in other people's problems, but here he was anyway. Garrett released the woman's wrist and turned to face Xander fully. "You just rode into town, friend. You don't know how things work here. I know that where I come from, a man does not put his hands on a woman who does not want them there." Xander kept his hand away from his gun, but the threat was implicit in his stance. The deputy finally stirred. "Now hold on, both of you. Mr. Garrett has legal standing regarding the debt. Then he can pursue it through proper legal channels," Xander said, not taking his eyes off Garrett. "Not by accosting women on the street." The woman had stepped back, rubbing her wrist, watching Xander with an expression he could not quite read. Garrett seemed to be calculating his options, measuring Xander's build and the way he carried himself. Whatever he saw there made him think better of pushing further. "This is not finished, Miss Reynolds," Garrett said finally, jabbing a thick finger in her direction. "You have until the end of the month." He shoved past Xander, deliberately bumping his shoulder, and stalked down the street. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over. The deputy gave Xander a long look. "I would advise you to be careful about who you defend in this town, friend. Things are not always what they seem." "They rarely are," Xander said flatly. The deputy shrugged and walked away. Xander turned to find the woman looking at him directly now. Her eyes a striking shade of blue-green that reminded him of the ocean he had seen once during the war. She was beautiful in a way that made him immediately want to leave, because beautiful women meant complications, and he had sworn off those along with everything else. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was steadier now. "Though you did not have to intervene, I was handling it." "You were getting your wrist crushed," Xander pointed out. A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed her face. "Fair point. Still, I appreciate it. Most people in this town pretend not to notice when Garrett decides to throw his weight around." I noticed the deputy was not eager to help. "The deputy works for whoever pays him best, and Garrett has deep pockets." She adjusted her hat, trying to restore some order to her appearance. "I am Lorelei Reynolds, since Garrett was kind enough to announce my business to the entire street. Xander Callahan." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt automatic despite his desire to end this conversation and walk away. "Are you new to Prescott, Mr. Callahan?" "Just arrived. I have land north of here. I will be ranching." He shifted his saddlebags, a clear signal that he intended to leave. But Lorelei Reynolds was studying him with those disconcerting eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted to show. "You are a soldier," she said, not quite a question. "Was," Xander corrected sharply. "Not anymore. I see." She did not press, which surprised him. "Well, Mr. Callahan, I find myself in your debt. If there is anything I can do to repay the kindness, please let me know. I run the school here in town, such as it is." A school teacher. Of course. That explained the educated speech, the steel spine. "No debt necessary, Miss Reynolds. I hope your situation with Garrett resolves itself." He tipped his hat again and turned to leave, determined to put this encounter behind him. He had already broken his own rule by getting involved, and he would not compound the mistake by lingering in conversation with a woman who looked at him like she could read the scars on his soul. "Mr. Callahan," she called after him, and against his better judgment he stopped. "Be careful. Garrett does not forget when someone crosses him, and neither do his friends. I will keep that in mind." Xander walked away without looking back, heading toward the hotel where he planned to spend one night before riding out to his land, and starting the isolated life he had been planning for months. But as he lay in the narrow hotel bed that night, listening to the sounds of Prescott's nightlife through the thin walls, he kept seeing those blue-green eyes, and the way Lorelei Reynolds had stood her ground against a man twice her size. He kept thinking about the debt she had mentioned, the dead father, the fraud that apparently nobody in power cared about. None of your business, he told himself firmly. You are here to disappear, not to play hero. He had learned the hard way that playing hero got men killed, got hearts broken, got promises shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. Sarah had taught him that lesson thoroughly when she had married his best friend, while Xander was off fighting in a war that had taken 3 years of his life. The promise he had made to her, the promise she had made in return, all of it meaningless in the end. And then there was the war itself, the promises made by officers who sent men to die for causes that shifted like sand. Xander had believed in it once, believed he was fighting for something meaningful. By the end, he had realized he was just another body being used up and thrown away. So he had sworn off both. No more women, no more war, no more causes, no more getting involved. Just him, his land, his cattle, and silence. The sun rose over Prescott, and Xander collected his horse from the livery, loaded his supplies, and rode north out of town without looking back. His land was exactly what the previous owner had described. Rough, scrubby, with a small creek running through it and a cabin that needed work but had good bones. Pine trees dotted the higher elevations, and in the distance, the mountains rose up blue and hazy. He spent the first week working from dawn until he was too exhausted to think, fixing fences, repairing the cabin roof, clearing brush. The solitude was supposed to be peaceful, but he found his mind wandering at odd moments to the scene outside the Wells Fargo office, to the sound of Lorelei Reynolds' voice saying she was handling it even as her wrist was being crushed. On the 8th day, he rode back into Prescott for more supplies. He told himself it was necessary, that he needed lumber and nails and food staples. He did not admit that part of him was curious about whether Lorelei Reynolds had resolved her problem with Garrett, or if the deadline Garrett had mentioned was still looming. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, grateful that the proprietor was a taciturn man who did not try to make conversation while he filled Xander's order. Xander was loading the supplies into his saddlebags when he heard raised voices from the nearby alley. He recognized Garrett's voice immediately, loud and aggressive. And then he heard Lorelei's, sharp with anger and something that sounded like desperation. Walk away. Every instinct screamed at him. This is not your problem. But he was already moving toward the alley, his hand dropping to his gun in a motion so practiced he did not even think about it anymore. He rounded the corner and saw Lorelei backed against the alley wall, Garrett looming over her with another man Xander did not recognize standing nearby. I told you the end of the month, Garrett was saying. Today is the last day. You have my money or you have something else to offer. I have nothing to give you, Lorelei said, her voice shaking but defiant. The debt is not legitimate and you know it. That is not what Judge Harrison says. I have a legal writ, Miss Reynolds. You either pay or I start taking property. Starting with that schoolhouse you are so fond of. Xander stepped into the alley. Seems like you make a habit of cornering women in tight spaces, Garrett. Garrett spun around, his face darkening when he saw Xander. You again. I thought you would have learned to mind your own business by now. I am a slow learner. Xander moved so that he was between Garrett and Lorelei, a position that put his back to her but gave him a clear view of both men. The stranger had his hand on his gun, and Xander read him as hired muscle, probably not particularly skilled but dangerous enough in a tight alley. This is a legal matter, Garrett said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. I have the writ right here. The schoolhouse property reverts to me unless Miss Reynolds pays her father's debt by sundown today. Xander did not take his eyes off the men. How much? Xander, no, Lorelei said sharply from behind him. How much? He repeated. Garrett's smile was unpleasant. $500. Plus interest. Call it 600 total. It was nearly everything Xander had saved, the money he had planned to use to buy cattle and equipment. But he could see the trap Garrett had laid, the legal fiction that would let him take the schoolhouse and probably everything else Lorelei owned. And he could feel the desperation radiating from the woman behind him, the same desperation he had seen in the eyes of too many people during the war, people being crushed by powers they could not fight. He had sworn off fighting other people's battles. But standing there in that alley with Lorelei at his back and Garrett's smug face in front of him, Xander realized that some promises were meant to be broken. "I will pay it," he heard himself say. "All of it, right now." Lorelei grabbed his arm. "Mr. Callahan, you cannot. That is an absurd amount of money. Can you pay it?" he asked without turning around, a long pause. "No." "Then let me." He finally looked at her, saw the mix of gratitude and anguish in her eyes. "We will work out the details later." Garrett was watching this exchange with interest. Well, the mysterious stranger is a white knight after all. Fine then. You bring me $600 cash to my office before sundown, and I will return the writ stamped satisfied. But if you are $1 short, the schoolhouse is mine. Xander knew he was being manipulated, knew there was something else going on beneath the surface, but he had already committed himself. "You will have your money." He turned and walked out of the alley, Lorelei following him. Out on the main street, she caught up to him and grabbed his arm again, forcing him to stop. "Why would you do this?" she demanded. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." He looked at her properly in the sunlight, saw the exhaustion around her eyes, the worn spots on her dress that she had tried to mend. "Your father was cheated, and Garrett is using the law as a weapon. I have seen it before. That does not explain why you would give up $600 for a stranger." Xander did not have a good answer for that, because he did not fully understand it himself. All he knew was that walking away felt like a betrayal of something fundamental, something he had thought the war had killed in him but apparently still flickered in some buried part of his chest. "Consider it a loan," he said finally. "You can pay me back when you are able." Her eyes searched his face, looking for an angle, a catch. "There has to be more to it than that. Men like Garrett do not do things out of kindness, and in my experience neither does anyone else. I am not Garrett." The words came out harsher than he intended. "I have the money." "You need the money. It is simple." "Nothing is ever simple, Mr. Callahan." But she was not arguing anymore because they both knew she had no other options. They walked together to the bank, where Xander withdrew $600 from his account, watching his savings dwindle to almost nothing. The bank clerk counted it out slowly, and Xander felt each bill like a nail being driven into the coffin of his plans. No cattle this season. No new equipment, just bare survival and starting over from scratch. He handed the money to Lorelei. "You should be the one to give it to him. Make sure he gives you that writ." Her hands trembled slightly as she took the bills. "I will pay you back, Mr. Callahan. Every cent. I swear it." "I know." And strangely, he did. There was something in her bearing, in the way she held herself despite everything, that told him she was a woman who kept her promises, unlike him. He had promised himself no more involvement, no more women, no more fighting. And in less than 2 weeks in Prescott, he had broken all three. They walked to Garrett's office, a squat building near the courthouse. Garrett was waiting with his hired man and another witness, making a show of checking his pocket watch when they arrived. "Cutting it close, Miss Reynolds." "The sun sets in about 3 hours." Lorelei counted out the money onto his desk without a word, her face composed but her eyes blazing. Garrett recounted it slowly, made a notation in a ledger, then pulled out the writ and stamped it with a flourish. "Debt satisfied. Pleasure doing business with you." "The pleasure was mine," Lorelei said coldly, taking the stamped writ. And you can tell Judge Harrison that the next time there is an election, I will personally ensure every family in this county knows about his corruption." Garrett's smile faded. "Careful, Miss Reynolds. You have won this round, but this town has a long memory. You might want to think about who you accuse." "Is that a threat?" Xander asked quietly. "It is friendly advice," Garrett said, but his eyes were hard. They left before the situation could escalate further. Outside, Lorelei stood for a moment in the fading afternoon light, clutching the stamped writ like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she said finally, and her voice was thick with emotion she was clearly trying to control. "I know that is inadequate, but I do not have better words right now." "You do not need to thank me. I do, though." She looked up at him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "That schoolhouse is all I have left of my father. It is where he taught before the consumption took him, where he tried to give these children something better than ignorance and prejudice. If Garrett had taken it, I do not know what I would have done." Xander felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he had tried very hard to kill over the past 2 years. Sympathy. Connection, the dangerous beginning of caring about someone else's pain. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," he said. He was. He was also terrible with money and too trusting of people like Garrett. She wiped at her eyes impatiently, angry at herself for showing weakness. "I should have been here. I was teaching in Tucson, thought I was building my own life." By the time I got his letter asking me to come home, he was already dying. I arrived 2 weeks before he passed. You could not have known, but I should have. She took a shaky breath, visibly gathering herself. "I am sorry. You do not need to hear my sorrows. You have done more than enough already." They stood there in an awkward silence, and Xander knew he should leave, should ride back to his land and put this entire situation behind him. Instead, he heard himself asking, "Have you eaten today?" She looked surprised. "I have not really thought about it. There is a restaurant across the street. Let me buy you dinner. We can discuss terms for repaying the loan." It was a flimsy excuse and they both knew it, but after a moment Lorelei nodded. "All right, but only if you let me buy. It seems wrong for you to spend even more money on my behalf. I can afford dinner, Miss Reynolds. So can I. Barely, but I can." There was pride in her voice, the same pride that had kept her standing up to Garrett despite everything. They compromised by splitting the cost, which seemed to satisfy her sense of independence. The restaurant was modest but clean, and the food was better than the trail rations Xander had been living on. Over plates of beef and potatoes, they talked. Lorelei told him about her father, a scholar from Boston who had come west with idealistic notions about education and progress, who had poured his small inheritance into building the schoolhouse and importing books. She talked about growing up in Prescott, watching the town change and grow, seeing the gap widen between people like Garrett who accumulated power and money, and people like her father who tried to serve the community. He loaned money to Garrett for a mining venture, she explained. Garrett showed him assay reports, claimed he had found a rich silver vein. "My father was not interested in the money for himself, but he thought if the mine succeeded, it would bring jobs to Prescott, help families. So he invested nearly everything he had." "But there was no silver vein," Xander guessed. "Oh, there was. But it was not on the claim Garrett had shown my father. Garrett made a fortune from a different mine entirely. When my father asked for his share of the profits, Garrett claimed the original venture had failed, that the money was lost. But he had kept the paperwork, and when my father died, he twisted it around to make it look like my father had borrowed from him instead of the other way around." And Judge Harrison backed his version. They are old friends, both part of the same circle that runs this town. Lorelei pushed food around her plate, her appetite clearly gone. I have letters from my father describing the actual arrangement, but Garrett's lawyers say they are not admissible because they are not notarized. It is all corrupt, but I do not have the money or the power to fight it the way it should be fought." Xander listened to all of this, recognizing the story because he had seen versions of it play out during the war. Men with power taking advantage of those without, using the law as a weapon instead of a shield, counting on the fact that most people could not fight back. It made him angry in a way he had not let himself feel in a long time, because anger led to action and action led to the kind of complications he had sworn to avoid. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Keep teaching. Try to rebuild." "Pay you back as quickly as I can, though I have no idea how long that will take." She met his eyes. "I meant what I said, Mr. Callahan. I will repay every cent, even if it takes years." "I believe you." He hesitated, then added, "And call me Xander. We have moved beyond formalities at this point." A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine one he had seen from her. "Only if you call me Lorelei." "Lorelei," he repeated, and liked the way it sounded, the rhythm of it. They talked longer than Xander had intended, the conversation ranging from the practical details of her teaching schedule to his plans for the ranch. He found himself telling her about Virginia, about the farm where he had grown up, though he carefully avoided mentioning the war or Sarah or any of the things that had brought him to Arizona. But Lorelei was perceptive, and he could see her noticing the gaps in his story, the careful way he skirted certain topics. She did not press, though, just as he did not press when she glossed over the years she had spent teaching in Tucson, the reason she had stayed away even as her father's health failed. By the time they left the restaurant, the sun had set and stars were emerging in the dark desert sky. Xander walked her to the small house behind the schoolhouse where she lived, a neat building that had clearly been maintained with care despite limited resources. "Thank you again, Xander," Lorelei said at her door, "for everything. You saved me today in more ways than one." "You would have found a way," he said, though he was not sure it was true. "Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you come back to town? Or are you planning to disappear onto your ranch and never emerge?" "The latter was my plan," he admitted. "That seems lonely." "That was also the plan." She studied him in the starlight, and he felt exposed under that gaze, like she could see all the broken pieces he was trying to keep hidden. "Loneliness is not the same as peace, Xander. I learned that after my father died. Isolation just gives you more time to think about everything you are running from." The observation cut closer than he wanted to acknowledge. "What makes you think I am running from something?" "Because people do not come to places like Prescott, to isolated ranches in the middle of nowhere, unless they are running towards something or running away from something. And you do not seem like a man chasing dreams." Xander should have been offended, but he was mostly impressed by her directness. "You do not pull your punches, do you? Life is too short and too hard for polite lies." She smiled again, softer this time. "I hope you will come back to town, Xander, if only so I can start paying you back. I get my teaching salary monthly. It is not much, but it is something. There is no rush on repayment. There is for me. I do not like being in debt, especially to someone who has already done so much." She opened her door, then paused. "There is a church social in 2 weeks. I know it is not the sort of thing a man looking for isolation would enjoy, but if you wanted a decent meal and some conversation that is not your own thoughts, you would be welcome." It was clearly an invitation, carefully offered so he could refuse without awkwardness. The smart thing would be to refuse, to thank her politely and leave and never come back except to collect the money she insisted on repaying. But looking at her standing in the doorway of her little house, her face tired but hopeful, Xander found he did not want to do the smart thing. "I will think about it," he said, which was more than he had planned to say. Her smile widened. "I will take that as a maybe. Good night, Xander. Good night, Lorelei." He rode back to his ranch in the dark, knowing the trails well enough by now to navigate by starlight. The cabin felt smaller when he returned, emptier, and he lay awake for a long time thinking about Lorelei's observation that loneliness was not the same as peace. He had been so certain that isolation was what he needed, that cutting himself off from people and their problems and their hearts was the only way to avoid being hurt again. But sitting across from Lorelei in that restaurant, listening to her talk about her father and her students and her determination to rebuild, he had felt something he had not felt in 2 years. He had felt alive, interested, connected to something beyond his own survival. It terrified him. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hard work. Xander threw himself into improving the ranch, repairing fences, clearing land, building a proper barn for the horses he hoped to buy when he had money again. He told himself he was too busy to think about Lorelei, too focused on the practical necessities of ranching to worry about church socials or blue-green eyes, or the way she had looked at him like he was something more than just a stranger who happened to have money at the right time. But he thought about her anyway, at odd moments when he was supposed to be concentrating on something else. He wondered if Garrett had caused her any more trouble. He wondered if the teaching was going well. He wondered if she had meant the invitation to the social, or if it had just been polite words she expected him to ignore. On the morning of the social, he woke before dawn with no intention of going. He had work to do. The fence on the eastern boundary needed reinforcing. There were supplies to inventory. A dozen practical reasons to stay home. By noon, he was washing the trail dust off himself in the creek. By mid-afternoon, he was putting on his cleanest shirt and trying to remember the last time he had cared what he looked like. By the time he rode into Prescott, the social was already underway in the yard beside the church. Tables set up with food, families gathered in clusters, children running and playing in the warm June sunshine. He felt conspicuous arriving alone, but several people nodded to him, recognizing him from the scene with Garrett. He tied his horse and was standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering when Lorelei appeared at his elbow. "You came," she said, and the pleasure in her voice was unmistakable. "I was passing through town anyway," he said, the lie obvious to both of them. "Of course you were." She was wearing a light blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair pinned up but with a few loose strands framing her face. She looked younger, lighter, less burdened than she had at their last meeting. "Come on, I will introduce you to some people, and you have to try Mrs. Henderson's apple pie. It is extraordinary." She looped her arm through his with easy familiarity, as if they were old friends instead of near strangers, and led him into the crowd. Over the next hour, she introduced him to what seemed like half the town. Families with children who attended her school, shop owners from Montezuma Street, ranchers from the surrounding area, even the minister who welcomed him warmly. Xander found himself relaxing despite his intentions, drawn into conversations about cattle prices and water rights and the best routes through the mountains. These were not the false pleasantries he had expected, but real discussions with people who were trying to make lives for themselves in difficult country. He recognized in them something of what had drawn him to Arizona, the desire to build something in a place where the past did not matter as much as what you could do now. But he also noticed the absences. Garrett was not there, nor were several other men Xander had seen around town, the ones with expensive clothes and an air of ownership. There was a division in Prescott, he realized, between the people at this church social and the people who ran the town from offices and back rooms. And that division was a fault line waiting to crack open. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lorelei brought him a plate of pie and they sat together on a bench at the edge of the yard, watching children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this is not your sort of thing." "What makes you think you know what my sort of thing is?" "The fact that you have been looking for escape routes since you arrived," she said with amusement. "You have the bearing of a man who is deeply uncomfortable in crowds. I have spent a lot of time alone in recent years." By choice or by necessity? Xander considered the question. "Both, I suppose. It seemed easier." "And is it?" "Easier." He looked at her, at the open curiosity in her face, the genuine interest. No one had asked him questions like this in a long time, had cared enough to push past polite surfaces. "I thought it would be, but your observation about loneliness and peace keeps rattling around in my head. I am sorry about that. I tend to say things I should probably keep to myself." "Do not be sorry. You were right." He set down his empty plate, suddenly needing to say things he had not planned to say. "I was in the war. Not at first by choice, but I stayed in by choice, kept re-enlisting because I thought I was fighting for something that mattered. By the time I realized what I was actually fighting for, I had lost 3 years and most of the men I served with. And when I came home, the woman I had been writing to, the woman I thought I would marry, had moved on with someone else. So I learned that promises do not mean much, that fighting for causes just gets you killed or broken, and that trusting people, especially women, is a good way to destroy yourself." Lorelei listened without interrupting, her face serious. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, then said, "That is a lot of pain to carry alone. It is lighter than carrying it with other people. Is it? Or does it just feel that way because you have convinced yourself that isolation is safety?" She turned to face him fully. "I am not going to pretend I understand what you went through in the war. I cannot imagine it. But I know something about loss and betrayal and deciding that trust is too dangerous. When I found out about Garrett and what he had done to my father, how many people in this town had known and said nothing, I wanted to leave. Go back to Tucson or somewhere else entirely, somewhere I did not have to see the corruption and indifference every day. But then I realized that leaving would not solve anything. It would just mean Garrett had won twice, once in stealing from my father and once in driving me away. So you stayed." "I stayed. And I fight in the ways I can. I teach those children to read and think critically. I tell them about ethics and justice, and standing up for what is right even when it is hard. I make sure they know that people like Garrett do not get to write the only story about what this town is or can be." She met his eyes. "That is not fighting a war, Xander, but it is fighting. And doing it alone would break me. I need the community. I need the parents who trust me with their children, the friends who bring me vegetables from their gardens when they know I am struggling, the minister who looks the other way when I use the church to hold community meetings Garrett would rather I not hold." "You are braver than I am," Xander said quietly. "I do not think so. I think you are just tired. There is a difference." She reached over and took his hand, a gesture so simple and unexpected that it made his breath catch. "You do not have to fight anymore, Xander. But you also do not have to disappear. There is a middle ground if you are willing to look for it." Her hand was warm in his, small but strong, and Xander found he did not want to let go. He had spent 2 years building walls, telling himself he was fine alone, that he did not need connection or community or anything resembling what he had lost. But sitting here with Lorelei as the stars began to emerge and the sound of laughter and conversation floated through the evening air, he felt those walls beginning to crack. "I do not know how to do the middle ground," he admitted. "I only know all or nothing. Then maybe it is time to learn something new. She squeezed his hand gently, then released it, standing up. I should help clean up, but I hope you will stay at least for a little while, and I hope you will come back to town, even if it is just to visit. I will think about it, he said, using the same words he had used before, but this time they both knew he meant yes. He did stay, helping to pack up tables and carry dishes, feeling awkward but also strangely content to be part of the mundane collective effort. Several people thanked him for helping Lorelei with Garrett, and he realized that his interference had not gone unnoticed, that in a small town like Prescott, actions had consequences that rippled outward in ways he had not anticipated. It was fully dark by the time he prepared to ride home. Lorelei walked him to his horse, and they stood together in the quiet street, the sounds of the social fading behind them. I meant what I said about the middle ground, she said softly. You do not have to make any big decisions or promises, just maybe do not disappear completely. Come to town when you need supplies. Stop by the schoolhouse if you are nearby. Let yourself be part of something, even if it is just on the edges. Why do you care? Xander asked, genuinely curious. You have your own problems. Why spend time worrying about a stranger who wants to be alone? Because I do not think you really want to be alone. I think you are scared of wanting something different, and I understand that fear. But also because you helped me when you did not have to, when you had every reason to walk away. That tells me something about who you are under all the walls you have built, and I would like to know that person better, if you would let me. It was one of the most honest things anyone had said to Xander in years, and he had no defense against it. All his careful reasoning about isolation and safety crumbled in the face of Lorelei's simple directness. I will come back, he said. I do not know when, but I will. Her smile in the darkness was like a light being turned on. Good, I will look forward to it. He rode home slowly, in no hurry to return to the empty cabin. The night was beautiful, the air cooling rapidly as it always did in the high desert, and overhead the stars were so thick and bright they looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Xander thought about Lorelei's hand in his, about the way she had spoken of fighting in small ways, about her invitation to find a middle ground. He thought about the promises he had made to himself 2 years ago, bitter promises born from pain and betrayal. And he thought about how, in the space of 2 weeks, a woman he barely knew had made him question everything he thought he had figured out about how to survive. The promises he had made were breaking, one by one. He had sworn off women, but here he was thinking about blue-green eyes and auburn hair, and a smile that made something in his chest feel lighter. He had sworn off fighting, but he had stepped into that alley knowing it might lead to violence, unable to walk away from injustice even when it was not his problem. He had sworn off caring about anything beyond his own survival, but the thought of Lorelei being cheated and hurt made him angry in a way that was dangerously close to caring. He was breaking every promise he had made to himself, and the truly terrifying part was that he did not want to stop. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Xander worked on the ranch during the days, making slow progress with his limited resources. But every few days he found excuses to ride into Prescott. He needed nails. He wanted news about cattle prices. He should check on whether his order at the feed store had arrived. And each time, he found himself stopping by the schoolhouse, timing his visits for when classes had ended. Lorelei always seemed pleased to see him, never questioning his transparent excuses, and they would talk while she cleaned up the classroom or walked together through town running errands. They talked about everything. She told him about her students, about the challenges of teaching children with wildly different backgrounds and abilities in a single room. He found himself telling her about the ranch, about his plans for the future, even about some of his memories from before the war, carefully edited stories about growing up in Virginia. Sometimes they did not talk much at all, just walked in companionable silence or sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the town go about its business. Xander found these quiet moments as valuable as the conversations, the simple comfort of being near someone who did not require anything from him except his presence. He also noticed that Lorelei was changing, or perhaps he was just seeing more clearly. She laughed more easily now than she had those first days, some of the strain leaving her face. She talked about plans for expanding the curriculum, about her hopes for her students' futures, with an enthusiasm that was contagious. And sometimes, when she thought he was not looking, he caught her watching him with an expression that made his pulse quicken, something warm and wondering that echoed feelings he was trying hard not to acknowledge in himself. But Prescott being a small town, their growing friendship did not go unnoticed. He started receiving nods and greetings from people who had been strangers a month before. Mrs. Henderson, whose apple pie he had praised at the church social, made a point of inviting him to Sunday dinners. The minister stopped him on the street to discuss the possibility of Xander joining the committee planning the July 4th celebration. Most significantly, Garrett noticed. Xander was at the general store loading supplies when Garrett approached, his hired man trailing behind him like an oversized shadow. "Mr. Callahan," Garrett said, his voice overly friendly in a way that set Xander's teeth on edge. "I've been seeing you around town quite a bit lately." "I thought you were a rancher, not a townsman." "A man can be both," Xander said evenly, continuing to load his horse without looking at Garrett. "True, true. Just interesting that you seem to spend a lot of time near the schoolhouse, near Miss Reynolds specifically." Garrett moved closer, lowering his voice. "A word of advice, friend to friend. That woman is trouble. She has ideas about changing the way things work in this town, about stirring up folks who should be left alone. A man looking to establish himself here would be wise to keep his distance from her and her causes." Xander finally turned to face Garrett fully, and whatever Garrett saw in his expression made the false friendliness fade from his face. "First, we are not friends. Second, I will spend my time with whoever I choose. And third, Miss Reynolds seems like one of the few people in this town actually trying to do something worthwhile. So if she is trouble, it is the good kind." Garrett's jaw tightened. "You are making a mistake. This town has a certain order, certain people who make decisions. Cross them, and you will find yourself with problems you did not anticipate." "Is that another threat? Because it sounds like one." "It is information. What you do with it is your business." Garrett stepped back, his hired man moving with him. "Just remember, Callahan, I tried to warn you. When things get difficult, and they will, you cannot say you did not know what you were getting into." They left, and Xander stood for a moment processing the encounter. He knew he should take the warning seriously, that Garrett had power in Prescott and ways of making life difficult for people who opposed him. The smart thing would be to step back, to put distance between himself and Lorelei before he got dragged into conflicts that were not his to fight. But the idea of staying away from her, of letting Garrett's threats dictate his actions, made him angry. He had already broken his promise about avoiding women. He had already broken his promise about avoiding fights. At this point, he might as well commit to the path he had chosen. He finished loading his supplies and rode to the schoolhouse. Classes had just ended, and children were spilling out into the afternoon sunshine, shouting and laughing. Lorelei was standing in the doorway, watching her students with the satisfied expression of someone who loved her work. She smiled when she saw him. "Twice in 1 week. I am starting to think you are not actually here for the supplies. Garrett approached me today. Xander said without preamble. Warned me to stay away from you, said you were trouble and that I would regret associating with you. The smile faded from Lorelei's face. I am sorry. I had hoped he would not drag you into this. I am already in it. I was in it the moment I stepped into that alley. He dismounted, moving closer to her. But I want to understand what I am in. What is Garrett really afraid of? It is not just you teaching children to read. Lorelei glanced around, checking that no students were close enough to overhear. Come inside. There are things you should probably know. He followed her into the schoolhouse, a single large room with desks arranged in rows, a blackboard at the front, and shelves lined with books. It smelled like chalk and paper, and the particular scent of children that was equal parts energy and chaos. Lorelei closed the door and leaned against it. Garrett and Judge Harrison and a few others control most of the business interests in Prescott and the surrounding area, she began. They own the bank, several of the largest ranches, mining interests, commercial properties, and they are not content with what they have. They have been pushing smaller ranchers and homesteaders off their land using legal maneuvers similar to what Garrett tried with me. Dubious debts, tax liens, water rights disputes, always just barely legal, always backed by Judge Harrison. And you are in their way because I am teaching their children and everyone else's children to question authority, to think critically, to understand that the law should protect everyone equally. She moved away from the door, pacing slightly. It sounds small, but education is power. The more people who understand their rights, who can read contracts and legal documents, who are not intimidated by fancy language and threats, the harder it is for men like Garrett to get away with what they are doing. So they want you gone. They want the school closed or at least under someone they can control. Someone who will teach just enough reading and arithmetic to make workers who can follow instructions, but not enough critical thinking to make them question the system. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. I know this is not the peaceful ranch life you came here for, Xander. I know you did not sign up for local politics and power struggles. If you want to step back, I understand. But I will not stop teaching the way I teach, and that means I will keep being a problem for Garrett. Xander looked at her standing there, defiant and determined despite knowing she was up against forces with far more power and resources than she had. He thought about the promises he had made to himself, about staying uninvolved and isolated and safe. And then he thought about what those promises had cost him, the slow death of living without purpose or connection. I am not stepping back, he said. Xander, you do not have to do this. You already helped me once. You do not owe me anything more. This is not about owing you anything. He closed the distance between them, needing her to understand. I spent 2 years telling myself that not caring was the same as being safe, that if I did not fight for anything or believe in anything or let myself care about anyone, I could not get hurt again. But all it did was make me half alive. You made me see that. I did not mean to complicate your life, she said softly, I know. But you did anyway, and I am grateful for it. He reached up, tucked one of those loose strands of hair behind her ear, a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying. You make me want to break all the promises I made to myself, Lorelei. The promise about avoiding women, the promise about avoiding fights, all of it. You make me want to be the kind of man who stands up for things again, even if it is dangerous. Her eyes had gone wide, her breath catching. Xander, I need you to be sure. Because if you stay involved with me, with what I am trying to do here, Garrett will come after you. He will find ways to hurt you to make your life difficult, and I could not bear it if you were hurt because of me. I am sure, he said, and meant it completely. I am tired of running from everything that matters. If standing with you means standing against Garrett and his friends, then that is what I will do. She studied his face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right. Then we are in this together." "Together," he agreed. The word hung in the air between them, meaning more than just their alliance against Garrett, and they both knew it. The attraction that had been building between them over the past weeks had crossed some invisible line into something real and acknowledged, and the air in the schoolhouse suddenly felt charged with possibility. Lorelei broke the moment first, stepping back and clearing her throat. "So what do we do now?" Xander forced his mind back to practical matters, though part of him wanted to ignore Garrett and politics and everything else except the way Lorelei was looking at him. "We need to understand what they are planning. If they want the school closed, how will they do it?" The school funding comes from a combination of territorial funds and local contributions. The territorial money is secure for this year, but the local part depends on the town council, which Garrett controls through various means. He could push to cut the local funding, which would make it impossible for me to maintain the building or buy supplies. So we need allies on the council. There are a few members who do not like Garrett, but they are scared of him. He has ways of putting pressure on people, threatening their businesses or calling in debts. She looked frustrated. "I have tried talking to them, but they all say their hands are tied. Maybe they need to see that there are people willing to stand with them, that they are not alone." An idea was forming in Xander's mind, something he had seen work during the war when soldiers were wavering about whether to follow orders they knew were wrong. "What if we called a town meeting? Got everyone together, not just Garrett's people, and let them hear from you directly about what the school is doing, why it matters." Lorelei considered this. "Garrett would try to shut it down, probably. But if enough people showed up, if they saw that there was support for what you are doing, it might give the council members the backbone they need to stand up to him." Xander was warming to the idea now. "The church social showed me there are a lot of people in this town who are not part of Garrett's circle, people who care about their children and their community. We need to reach them, organize them." "That sounds like fighting, Xander. That sounds like war." "It is not war," he said firmly. "It is community organizing. It is people coming together to protect something they value. There are no guns, no violence, just voices and votes." She was smiling now, a fierce expression that made her look beautiful and dangerous all at once. "I think I like this version of breaking promises." "All right. Let us organize a meeting, but we will need help. We cannot do this alone." They spent the next hour making plans, identifying people who might support them, strategizing about how to spread the word without alerting Garrett too early. By the time Xander left, the sun was setting and his mind was buzzing with possibilities and logistics. He felt more energized than he had in years, like he had been woken from a long sleep. The next weeks were busy. Xander found himself riding into Prescott almost daily, meeting with ranchers and shop owners, families with children in the school, anyone who might be willing to support their cause. Lorelei worked her own connections, talking to parents, enlisting the help of sympathetic women in town who had their own reasons for wanting to see Garrett's power challenged. It was delicate work. They had to be careful not to make direct accusations that could lead to legal trouble. Had to frame everything in terms of supporting education and community values rather than opposing specific people. But word spread anyway, as word always does in small towns, and by the time they scheduled the meeting for mid-July, Garrett knew exactly what they were planning. The confrontation came 2 days before the scheduled meeting. Xander was riding back from a neighboring ranch where he had secured a commitment of support when he found the road blocked by Garrett, and 3 of his men, all armed. Xander reined in his horse, his hand instinctively dropping toward his gun before he caught himself. This was not the war. He did not have to fight unless they forced it. "Mr. Callahan," Garrett said, his voice cold now, the pretense of friendliness gone, "you have been busy making trouble. I have been talking to my neighbors. Last I checked, that was legal. Stirring up dissent against lawful authority is not legal. It is sedition." Garrett moved his horse closer, blocking Xander's path. "I gave you a chance to walk away from this, to mind your own business. You did not take it. Now there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Are you going to shoot me on an open road in broad daylight?" Xander kept his voice level, calculating odds. 4-1, all armed, but he was a better shot than most men, and he had cover in the rocks to his right if it came to that. "Because that seems like the kind of thing that might cause problems even for you." "No one said anything about shooting," one of Garrett's men said, but his hand was on his gun, and Xander could see the eagerness in his eyes, the desire for violence that some men carried like a sickness. "Here is what is going to happen," Garrett said. "You are going to cancel that meeting. You are going to stop talking to people about the school and Miss Reynolds and anything else that does not concern you. And then you are going to go back to your ranch and stay there. Do that and we can forget this unfortunate misunderstanding. And if I do not, then accidents happen, ranches burn, cattle get driven off, men disappear." Garrett's smile was ugly. "You are new here, Callahan. You do not have family, do not have deep roots. Nobody would even notice if you were gone." Xander felt the old familiar anger rising, the battle rage that had kept him alive through the war but had also nearly destroyed him. He wanted to reach for his gun, to settle this the way such things had been settled then. But that was exactly what Garrett wanted, an excuse for violence that would eliminate a problem and intimidate everyone else. "You are right that I do not have deep roots here," Xander said carefully, "but I have friends now, people who would notice if something happened to me. And if accidents started happening, people might start asking questions about who benefits from those accidents. You think anyone would believe you over me, over Judge Harrison and the town council?" Garrett laughed. "You are nobody, Callahan. A drifter with a hardscrabble ranch and dreams above your station. Maybe. But I am also a man with nothing left to lose, which makes me dangerous in ways you have not thought about." Xander met Garrett's eyes steadily. "You threaten my ranch. I will make sure everyone in the territory knows about how you cheated Lorelei's father. You threaten me. I will make it my life's work to expose every corrupt deal you have ever made. I have time, Garrett. I have patience. And I have very little left to care about except making sure you do not destroy a good woman who is trying to help children." The threat landed. He could see it in the way Garrett's confidence flickered. Men like Garrett were used to people backing down, to threats being enough. They were not used to someone calling their bluff, someone willing to make it personal and ugly. "The meeting is happening," Xander continued. "People are going to speak. And you are going to let it happen because the alternative is that I become the biggest problem you have ever had. Do we understand each other?" For a long moment, nobody moved. The desert air was hot and still, and Xander could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. This was the moment that would determine everything, whether Garrett would push to violence or accept a stalemate. Finally, Garrett yanked his horse's reins, turning aside. "This is not over, Callahan." "I did not think it was." Xander waited until Garrett and his men had ridden away before allowing himself to breathe normally again. His hands were shaking slightly with adrenaline, and he realized how close that had come to ending badly. He rode straight to Lorelei's house, needing to tell her what had happened, needing to make sure she was safe. She opened the door at his knock, and her smile of greeting faded when she saw his expression. "What happened?" He told her about the confrontation on the road, watching her face pale as he described Garrett's threats. When he finished, she was gripping the door frame so hard her knuckles were white. "You should not have threatened him," she said, her voice shaking. "He could kill you, Xander. He has done it before, I am sure of it." Men who opposed him too openly have disappeared or had fatal accidents, and nobody ever proves anything but everyone knows. I could not let him think he could intimidate me. If I had backed down, he would have known he could push further, could threaten you next. So instead he will just skip the threats with you and move straight to action. She pulled him inside, closing the door as if that could shut out the danger. "We should cancel the meeting. It is not worth your life." "We are not canceling." Xander caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Lorelei, this is exactly what he wants. He wants us scared, wants us to believe he is all-powerful. But he is not. He is just a man with money and connections, and we have something he does not." "What is that?" "We have people who actually care about this community, who are tired of being pushed around. That meeting is going to happen, and people are going to see that they are not alone in wanting change." He squeezed her hands gently. "Trust me. I know something about fighting when the odds are bad. The key is not to fight their fight. We are not going to use violence or intimidation. We are just going to speak truth and let people decide what kind of town they want to live in." She looked up at him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I am terrified for you. If something happened to you because of me, because you decided to help with my problems, I could not forgive myself. Nothing is going to happen to me." He said it with more confidence than he felt, but he needed her to believe it. "And these are not just your problems anymore. They are our problems. I made that choice when I decided to stay, when I decided you were worth breaking my promises for." "Xander," she whispered, and then suddenly she was in his arms, holding on to him tightly as if she could keep him safe through sheer will. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, two people clinging to each other in the face of forces larger than themselves. And then Lorelei pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those blue-green eyes that had captivated him from the start. "I am falling in love with you," she said quietly. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I need you to know. Because if Garrett does something, if something happens to you, I need you to know that you matter to me, that you are not alone." Xander felt something crack open in his chest, some last wall he had been maintaining crumbling into dust. "I am falling in love with you too," he admitted. "I have been fighting it because I was scared, because I thought loving someone again would destroy me. But being with you does not feel like destruction. It feels like coming back to life." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against the rough stubble of his jaw. "We are a pair, are we not? Both of us so scared of being hurt again that we nearly missed each other entirely. But we did not miss each other. We are here." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. It was the first kiss for both of them in a long time, a promise and a risk and a defiant act of hope all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorelei was smiling through her tears. "All right. We do the meeting. We do this right. And we trust that truth and community are stronger than Garrett's threats." "Together," Xander said, echoing the word they had used before, giving it new weight. "Together," she agreed. The night of the meeting arrived with tension crackling through the air like an approaching thunderstorm. They had chosen to hold it in the church, rather than the schoolhouse, both because it was larger and because the minister had agreed to host, despite the risks. By the time Xander and Lorelei arrived, the church was already half full, families crowding into pews, ranchers and shop owners standing in the back when the seats ran out. Garrett was there too, sitting in the front row with Judge Harrison, and several other men Xander recognized as part of his circle. They looked confident, almost amused, like this was entertainment rather than a genuine challenge to their authority. The minister opened with a prayer, then turned the floor over to Lorelei. She stood at the front of the church, looking small and young and utterly determined, and began to speak. She talked about education, about what the school was teaching and why it mattered. She described her students' progress, the children who had learned to read, to write, to question the world around them. She explained how the school operated on a combination of territorial and local funding, and how the local funding was under threat. But more than that, she talked about community, about the kind of town Prescott could be, a place where children had opportunities regardless of their family's wealth or connections. A place where the law protected everyone equally, where people could build lives without fear of being crushed by those with more power. She spoke with passion and clarity, making it clear that this was not about her personally, but about the values the community claimed to hold. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, a rancher Xander had spoken with the week before. Others joined in, and soon most of the room was applauding. Not everyone, there were some who sat in stony silence, aligned with Garrett by choice or necessity. But enough people that it was clear Lorelei had support. Garrett stood, his face flushed with anger. "This is all very touching, Miss Reynolds, but you are telling half the story. The school is not under threat because of some conspiracy. It is under threat because it is expensive and inefficient. The town council has a responsibility to allocate limited resources wisely, not to waste money on elaborate curriculum when basic literacy would suffice. Basic literacy keeps people dependent on others to interpret contracts and legal documents for them," Lorelei shot back. "Real education gives them independence, unless that is what you are afraid of, Mr. Garrett. Independent thinkers who might question whether your business dealings are as legitimate as you claim." A murmur ran through the crowd. Garrett's face darkened further. "You are coming very close to slander, Miss Reynolds. Then sue me. Bring your evidence before a fair judge, not one who plays cards with you every week, and let a jury decide." She crossed her arms. "But we both know you will not do that because your deals do not stand up to scrutiny." Judge Harrison stood now, his voice booming. "Young woman, you are out of line. The legal system in this town is beyond reproach, and I will not sit here and be insulted." The minister stepped forward, his normally gentle face stern. "With respect, Judge Harrison, this is a community meeting in a house of God. Everyone here has a right to speak their mind without threats of legal action. If you cannot abide by that, perhaps you should leave." It was a bold stand for the minister to take, and Xander saw several people in the crowd sitting up straighter, emboldened by his example. Garrett saw it too, and Xander could see him recalculating, realizing that his usual tactics of intimidation were not working here. "Fine," Garrett said tightly. "Let us have this discussion properly then. A vote. Everyone here who wants to continue funding the school at current levels, knowing it means higher costs for everyone, raise your hand." Hands went up across the room, more than half the people present. Garrett's expression turned ugly. "And everyone who thinks the school funding should be reduced to sustainable levels, giving the town council flexibility to allocate resources elsewhere, raise your hand." Fewer hands this time, though Garrett and his allies made a show of raising theirs high. "There is your answer, Mr. Garrett," Lorelei said quietly. "The community wants the school funded. The question is whether you and the council will respect that or impose your own preferences regardless of what people want." Garrett stepped closer to her, his bulk intimidating, his voice low and dangerous. "You have made an enemy today, Miss Reynolds. I hope you understand that." Xander was moving before he thought about it, placing himself between Garrett and Lorelei. "You need to step back. Or what?" "You will shoot me in a church full of witnesses," Garrett smiled coldly. "You are not as clever as you think, Callahan. Neither are you." Xander kept his voice level. "Because you just threatened a woman in front of half the town, including the minister. People heard that. People will remember. So maybe you should consider that your usual methods are not going to work anymore, that the town is changing whether you like it or not." For a moment, Xander thought Garrett might actually throw a punch. Consequences be damned. But Judge Harrison put a hand on Garrett's arm, murmuring something, and after a tense pause, Garrett turned and stalked out of the church, his allies following. The silence they left behind was profound. Then the minister cleared his throat. "Well, I think we have all seen something important tonight. This community has a voice, and it has chosen to support education and the values Miss Reynolds represents. It is now up to the town council to decide whether they will honor that voice or ignore it." More applause, louder this time. People came forward to thank Lorelei, to shake Xander's hand, to promise their support. It felt like victory, fragile and new but real. But as they were leaving the church an hour later, Xander could not shake the feeling that they had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Garrett was not the type of man to accept defeat gracefully, and his parting threat had been sincere. The question was not if he would retaliate, but when and how. Xander walked Lorelei home, both of them exhausted but exhilarated. At her door, she turned to him, her face glowing in the lamplight from inside her house. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually stood up to him and people supported us." "You did it," Xander corrected. "I just stood there looking intimidating. You did more than that. You stood with me. You made me believe this was possible." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Thank you, Xander, for everything, for breaking your promises, for risking yourself, for caring about something again." "Thank you for making me want to," he said, and kissed her again, longer this time, pouring into it all the feelings he had been afraid to acknowledge. When they parted, both were breathless. "Stay," she whispered. "Not because I am scared, though I am a little, but because I do not want to be apart from you tonight, because I want to fall asleep knowing you are here, safe." It was improper by every standard of the time, and in a small town like Prescott, there would be talk if anyone found out. But Xander found he did not care about propriety or gossip or any of the things that would have mattered in his old life. He cared about Lorelei, about the feelings growing between them that felt like the most real thing he had experienced in years. "I will stay," he said. They went inside together, and Lorelei lit lamps while Xander checked the windows and doors, old soldier's habits he could not shake. The house was small but tidy, filled with books and papers, evidence of a life devoted to learning and teaching. They did not make love that night, both understanding without discussion that they were not quite ready for that step, that some things were worth waiting for. Instead, they lay together in Lorelei's bed, fully clothed, holding each other in the darkness while they talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures, the kind of intimate conversation that builds bonds stronger than physical passion. At some point, Xander fell asleep, the first truly restful sleep he had had in years. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Lorelei still in his arms, her head on his chest, her breathing deep and even. He lay there for a while, watching her sleep, marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few months. He had come to Arizona planning to disappear, to live out his days in isolation, nursing his wounds and his broken promises. Instead, he had found a woman who challenged him, who made him want to be better, who gave him something worth fighting for that was not about war or violence but about building and protecting and nurturing. He had broken every promise he had made to himself. And lying there with Lorelei in his arms, watching the Arizona sun paint her face in gold, he could not bring himself to regret a single broken vow. She stirred, opening her eyes slowly, and smiled when she saw him watching her. "Good morning. Good morning." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months. You, better than I have in years." He kissed her forehead. "But we should probably get up before the entire town starts gossiping about the schoolteacher's overnight guest." She laughed, a sound of pure joy that made his chest tighten. "Let them gossip. I am tired of living by other people's rules." They made breakfast together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with unexpected ease, as if they had been doing this for years rather than experiencing it for the first time. They talked about practical things, what came next, how to maintain the momentum from the meeting, who they needed to talk to on the town council. But underneath, the practical conversation was an awareness of each other, a new intimacy that changed everything. Touches lingered longer than necessary. Glances held meaning beyond words. They were crossing into new territory together, scary and exhilarating all at once. Xander left late morning, needing to get back to his ranch to handle neglected chores. But he promised to return in a few days, and this time neither of them pretended it was about supplies or chance visits. They were courting now, officially, even if they had done it backwards by falling in love first and dealing with propriety later. The next week passed in a blur of work and hope. The town council met and, under pressure from the community turnout at the church, voted to maintain the school's funding. It was not a permanent victory. The vote had been close and could be reversed in the future, but it was a reprieve. Garrett remained conspicuously absent from town, and rumors flew about what he might be planning. Some said he was negotiating land deals in Tucson. Others claimed he was meeting with territorial officials, trying to undermine the local decision about the school. Nobody knew for certain, but the absence felt ominous rather than reassuring. Xander spent his days working the ranch and his evenings in town, usually ending up at Lorelei's house, where they would share dinner and conversation. Their relationship deepened with each meeting, moving beyond the initial rush of attraction into something more solid and enduring. They learned each other's habits, their moods, the unspoken ways they communicated comfort and care. He learned that she hummed while she cooked, old folk songs her father had taught her. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, waking with a gasp and a reach for a gun that was not there, and that the best thing she could do was hold him silently until the memories faded. They learned to be vulnerable with each other, to share the broken places alongside the strengths. 3 weeks after the church meeting, Xander woke in Lorelei's bed, early morning light just starting to filter through the curtains. She was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful, and he took a moment to simply appreciate the miracle of her presence in his life. He had been so convinced that he would spend his remaining years alone that he was too damaged and too wary to ever risk his heart again. But here he was, deeply in love with a woman who somehow saw past his defenses to the man he used to be and could be again. He was about to wake her with a kiss when he heard horses outside, several of them, and then loud pounding on the door. "Lorelei Reynolds, open up. We have a warrant." Lorelei jerked awake, confusion giving way to alarm. Xander was already moving, pulling on his boots, his hand instinctively checking for his gun. "Stay here," he told her, but she was already out of bed, grabbing a robe. "It is my house," she said. "I am not hiding." The pounding came again, harder. Xander opened the door to find the deputy from the Wells Fargo confrontation standing there with two other men, all armed, all looking uncomfortable but determined. "What is this about?" Xander demanded. The deputy held up a paper. "We have a warrant for Miss Reynolds' arrest. She is being charged with inciting a riot and disturbing the peace." "That is absurd," Lorelei said, pushing past Xander. "The church meeting was peaceful. No laws were broken. Judge Harrison disagrees. You made inflammatory statements, incited people against lawful authority. You need to come with us." Xander felt rage building, the old battle fury that had gotten him through the war but had also nearly destroyed his humanity. This is Garrett's doing. He could not win through legitimate means, so he is using the law as a weapon. "That is not for me to decide, Mr. Callahan. I am just executing the warrant." The deputy actually looked apologetic, but not enough to disobey orders. "Miss Reynolds, you can come peacefully or we can do this the hard way." "Give us a moment to make ourselves presentable," Lorelei said with icy dignity, "unless you plan to arrest me in my night clothes." The deputy hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, but we will be right outside." Xander closed the door and turned to Lorelei, who was already moving toward her wardrobe. "We need to get you a lawyer." "There are no lawyers in Prescott except the ones who work for Garrett and his friends." She was dressing quickly, her hands shaking slightly but her voice steady. "This is what I was afraid of. He is going to use the legal system to crush me, and there is nothing we can do about it." "There is always something we can do." Xander was thinking rapidly, trying to see a way through this that did not end with Lorelei in jail or worse. "What happens if you are convicted? I do not know. Jail time probably. A fine I cannot pay, definitely losing the school." She turned to face him, and he saw fear in her eyes but also resignation, as if she had known this was coming all along. "I am sorry, Xander. I dragged you into this, made you break your promises, and for what? So we could be crushed anyway." He crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. "Do not apologize. Not for any of it. You gave me something to care about, something to fight for that was not about death and destruction. Whatever happens now, I do not regret that." Tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. "I love you. I should have said it more clearly before. I love you, Xander Callahan, and you deserve so much better than getting tangled up in my impossible fight. I love you too. And there is nothing impossible about this. We just need to be smarter than Garrett, which should not be that hard considering he is relying on brute force and corruption." He kissed her fiercely, a promise and a declaration. "Go with them. Do not resist. Do not give them any excuse to hurt you. I am going to fix this. How? I have no idea yet, but I will figure it out." He kissed her again, then reluctantly let her go. She finished dressing, pinned up her hair with shaking hands, and walked out to face the deputy with her head high. Xander watched them lead her away, helpless rage and fear warring in his gut. He had broken his promise about avoiding fights, but now he was in one whether he liked it or not, and the stakes were higher than just his own survival. He rode straight to the minister's house, pounding on the door until the man appeared, still in his nightshirt. "Xander, what has happened?" "They arrested Lorelei, trumped up charges about inciting a riot. She's going to be tried before Judge Harrison, which means she has no chance." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I need help. We need to do something." The minister's face hardened. "Come inside. We need to think this through carefully." Over the next hours, they worked out a plan. The minister agreed to send telegrams to Tucson and Phoenix, trying to reach territorial officials who might intervene. Xander rode to every ranch and home where he knew they had support, spreading the word about Lorelei's arrest and calling for another meeting. But more than that, he started gathering information. He talked to people who had done business with Garrett, who had been cheated or threatened. He collected stories, names, dates, building a case against Garrett's corruption that might be enough to sway even a biased judge if it was presented publicly. It was exhausting work, made harder by his constant worry about Lorelei. She was being held in the small jail behind the courthouse, and the deputy would not let Xander see her. He had no idea if she was being treated well, if she was scared, if she knew he was doing everything in his power to free her. 3 days after her arrest, the trial was scheduled. Xander had not slept more than a few hours, running on coffee and determination, and the bitter knowledge that if he failed, the woman he loved would be destroyed by men who valued power over justice. The courtroom was packed, word having spread about the trial. Garrett sat at the prosecutor's table, looking confident. Judge Harrison presided with an air of bored authority, and Lorelei sat alone at the defense table, looking small and tired but unbroken. Their eyes met across the room, and Xander tried to communicate everything he was feeling, the love and determination and promise that he would not let her face this alone. She gave him a small smile, brave and heartbreaking. The trial was a farce. The prosecution presented testimony from men who claimed Lorelei had made inflammatory statements at the church meeting, had encouraged people to defy lawful authority. Never mind that half the witnesses had not even been at the meeting, or that the statements they quoted were taken wildly out of context. Lorelei defended herself as best she could, but without legal training or representation, she was outmatched. She spoke truthfully about what had been said, about the peaceful nature of the meeting, but Judge Harrison kept ruling against her, sustaining Garrett's objections, making it clear how the verdict would go. Xander watched it all with growing fury, his hands clenched so hard his nails drew blood from his palms. This was worse than war, because at least in war, the enemy was clear and you could fight back directly. Here, they were using civilized procedure as a weapon, perverting justice into a tool of oppression. The prosecution rested. Lorelei had no witnesses to call because most people were too scared to testify against Garrett's version of events. Judge Harrison was preparing to charge the jury when Xander stood up. "Your Honor, I have evidence that is relevant to this case." Judge Harrison frowned. "Mr. Callahan, you are not part of these proceedings. Then make me part of them. I have testimony from a dozen people about Mr. Garrett's business practices, about threats and intimidation, about the reason Miss Reynolds felt compelled to organize that meeting in the first place. Context matters, Your Honor. The jury deserves to hear the whole story." Garrett shot to his feet. "Objection. This is completely improper. Mr. Callahan is trying to turn a simple case about disturbing the peace into a circus." "Exactly my point," Xander said loudly, addressing the packed courtroom rather than the judge. "Mr. Garrett wants to make this about one meeting, about a few statements taken out of context. But this is really about a man with power trying to silence someone who dared to question that power. And everyone in this room knows it." Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Mr. Callahan, sit down or I will have you removed for contempt." "Remove me then. Arrest me too. Fill your jail with everyone who knows the truth about what you and Garrett have been doing." Xander was past caring about consequences now, past worrying about his own safety. "But before you do that, let me tell everyone here what I have learned." He proceeded to do exactly that, speaking rapidly before the bailiff could drag him away, laying out the pattern of Garrett's business dealings, the threats, the legal manipulations. He named names, cited specific cases, described how the system was being used to enrich a few at the expense of the community. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some in support of Xander's statements, others trying to shout him down. Judge Harrison was banging his gavel and yelling for order, but nobody was listening. The bailiff moved toward Xander, but several men from the audience blocked his path, clearly ready to defend Xander's right to speak. And through it all, Lorelei was watching him with tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her mouth as if she could not believe what he was risking for her. Finally, the minister stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your Honor, Judge Harrison, you need to listen to this." The room gradually quieted, perhaps because the minister was one of the few people with moral authority that even Garrett and Harrison could not completely ignore. "There is a telegram from the territorial governor's office," the minister continued, holding up a paper. "In response to concerns raised about legal proceedings in Prescott, the governor is sending an investigator to review certain cases and business dealings, and he specifically mentions this trial as one that should be postponed pending that review." The silence that followed was profound. Judge Harrison snatched the telegram, read it, and his face went gray. Garrett looked like he had been punched. "This is outrageous," Garrett sputtered. "The territorial government has no right to interfere with local justice." "They have every right when that local justice is corrupt," Xander said. "And now everyone is going to find out just how corrupt." Judge Harrison looked around the courtroom, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he banged his gavel one last time. "This trial is postponed pending review by territorial authorities. Miss Reynolds is released on her own recognizance. Court is adjourned." The room erupted again, this time in cheers. Lorelei stood shakily, looking dazed as if she could not believe what had just happened. Xander pushed through the crowd to reach her, and when he did, she threw herself into his arms, holding onto him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "You did it," she whispered. "I do not know how, but you did it." "We did it," he corrected. "You were brave enough to speak up in the first place. I just finished what you started." They stood like that while the courtroom slowly emptied, people stopping to shake their hands, to promise support, to express their fury at how close Lorelei had come to being railroaded. The minister joined them, beaming. "The territorial investigator will be here in 2 weeks," he said. "I suggest we make sure he hears from everyone who has been wronged by Garrett and his associates." "We will," Lorelei said, her voice stronger now. She looked up at Xander. "Take me home, please. I need to be somewhere safe with you." They walked out into the afternoon sunshine, and it felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. Xander knew the fight was not over, that Garrett would not give up easily, that there would be more challenges ahead. But for now, they had won a reprieve. Justice, real justice, might actually prevail. At Lorelei's house, they finally allowed themselves to collapse, the adrenaline and fear of the past days catching up with both of them. They held each other on her small sofa, not talking, just breathing and being grateful to be together and free. "I was so scared," Lorelei admitted finally. "Not just of jail, but of losing you, of having brought you into something that destroyed you. You did not bring me into anything. I chose to be here, chose to fight, chose you." Xander tilted her face up to look at him. "And I would choose you again, every time, no matter the cost. Even though it means breaking all those promises you made to yourself, especially because of that. Those promises were about closing myself off from life, from caring, from risk. But life without risk is just slow death." He kissed her softly. "You brought me back to life, Lorelei. You made me remember why things are worth fighting for. I will never regret that." She kissed him back, deeper this time, and they moved from the sofa to her bedroom with unspoken agreement. This time when they lay together, it was different, urgent and tender all at once. They made love slowly, discovering each other, expressing through touch what words could not capture. It was healing and affirming, and a promise of the future they would build together. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the afternoon light, Lorelei traced patterns on Xander's chest, following the scars he bore from the war and the hard life since. "Marry me," Xander said suddenly. She looked up, startled. "What? Marry me?" "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am more certain of you than I have ever been of anything." He caught her hand, pressed it against his heart. "I love you, Lorelei Reynolds. I want to build a life with you, fight alongside you, wake up with you every morning." "Marry me." She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. "Yes, yes, of course yes. I love you, Xander. I want all of that too." They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Xander felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he had not felt in years. He had come to Arizona looking for isolation, running from war and heartbreak and broken promises. Instead, he had found a woman who made him want to break every vow he had made to himself, who showed him that fighting for something worth having was not the same as the meaningless violence of war, who loved him not despite his scars but including them. The territorial investigator arrived 2 weeks later as promised, a serious man named Thornton who listened carefully as witness after witness came forward with stories of Garrett's corruption. Xander and Lorelei testified together, providing documentation and names, building an overwhelming case. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Garrett's influence in Prescott crumbled. People were no longer afraid to speak openly about his crimes, no longer willing to pretend the system was fair. Judge Harrison was suspended from his position, pending review by the Territorial Supreme Court. Several other members of Garrett's circle fled town ahead of potential charges. Garrett himself tried to brazen it out, claiming the investigation was politically motivated, that he was being persecuted for success. But the evidence was too damning. In the end, he was charged with fraud, bribery, and extortion. He fled Prescott before he could be arrested, disappearing into Mexico according to rumors. Xander and Lorelei were married in October, in the same church where they had held the fateful community meeting. Half the town attended, and the celebration lasted until after midnight. They honeymooned at Xander's ranch, spending a week alone together, making love and making plans for their future. With the money from a settlement the territorial government forced Garrett's estate to pay, Lorelei was able to expand the school, hiring an assistant teacher and buying new books and supplies. Enrollment doubled as more families moved to Prescott, drawn by the town's growing reputation as a place where justice and education mattered. Xander's ranch prospered too. He was able to buy cattle finally, build proper fences, even hire help when he needed it. But more importantly, he found himself part of a community, no longer isolated but woven into the fabric of Prescott's life. He joined the committee planning the new town hall. He helped organize a collective of small ranchers to negotiate better prices for their cattle. He became someone who mattered, not because of violence or war, but because of what he built and protected. The nightmares did not go away completely. Some nights he still woke reaching for a gun, remembering battles and dying men. But Lorelei was always there, holding him, bringing him back to the present, reminding him that he was safe and loved and home. The nightmares became less frequent, the memories less sharp, as new and better memories replaced them. 2 years after they married, Lorelei gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Xander's mother. Holding his daughter for the first time, looking down at her tiny, perfect face while Lorelei watched from the bed with exhausted joy, Xander felt something he had thought lost forever. He felt hope. He felt purpose. He felt like he belonged somewhere to someone, for reasons that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with love. "What are you thinking?" Lorelei asked softly. "That I came here planning to be alone for the rest of my life," Xander said, unable to look away from his daughter's face. That I made all these promises to myself about never trusting anyone again, never caring, never fighting for causes, and you made me break every single one of those promises. You regret it. But she was smiling because she knew the answer. Not for a second. You saved me, Lorelei. You and this impossible fight for a schoolhouse and justice. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man surviving. He looked up at her finally, this woman who had changed everything. I love you. I love our daughter. I love the life we are building. And I would break 1,000 promises if it meant I got to have this. Good. Because I am not done making you break promises. I want at least 3 more children, a bigger house, and for you to finally agree to teach Sunday school like the minister keeps asking. Xander laughed, a sound of pure joy that their daughter seemed to respond to, her tiny hand gripping his finger with surprising strength. Sunday school might be pushing it, but 3 more children and a bigger house. I think we can manage that. They did manage it and more. Over the next 10 years, they had 2 more children, a son named Daniel and another daughter they called Rose. They built a house that was large enough for their growing family but still felt like home, close enough to town for Lorelei to walk to the school but far enough for Xander to work the ranch. Prescott changed too, growing from a rough frontier town into a real community with laws that applied equally, with schools and churches and businesses that served everyone rather than enriching a few. It was not perfect, no place ever was, but it was better than it had been, and that was enough. Xander remained involved in local affairs, serving on the town council for several terms, always advocating for the kind of justice and fairness that Lorelei had fought for from the beginning. He never stopped being grateful that he had walked away from isolation, that he had chosen to get involved when he saw a woman being threatened, that he had let Lorelei convince him to risk his heart again. The war scars faded but never disappeared entirely. Some memories would always hurt. But they were balanced now by so many other memories. Lorelei's laugh, the sound of children playing, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains, the satisfaction of work well done and a community well served. Years later, when Xander was 50 and Lorelei was 46, they sat together on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings. Their children were grown now, Daniel running the ranch and building his own life, Sarah teaching alongside her mother at the expanded school, Rose studying to be a lawyer in Phoenix, determined to fight injustice with the tools of the legal system. "Do you ever think about those promises you made yourself?" Lorelei asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "The ones about never trusting women or fighting for causes." "Sometimes," Xander admitted. "Usually when I am trying to explain to our grandchildren why principles matter, why standing up for what is right is worth the cost." They had 5 grandchildren now, and likely more on the way, a whole new generation who would never know what Prescott had been like before Lorelei had insisted on real education, and Xander had decided to stand with her. "What do you tell them?" Lorelei asked. "I tell them that promises are important, but so is knowing when to break them. That sometimes the promises we make out of pain keep us trapped, and the only way to heal is to risk being hurt again." He tightened his arm around her. "I tell them that their grandmother was the bravest person I ever met, and that loving her was the best decision I ever made, even though it meant breaking every vow I had made to protect myself." "That is a lot of pressure to put on a person," Lorelei said, but she was smiling. "You can handle it. You handled Garrett. You handled me when I was determined to be alone. You handled building a school and a family and a life that mattered." He kissed the top of her head. "You are extraordinary, Lorelei Callahan. You always have been." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Daniel calling the cattle in for the evening. Closer, the sound of Sarah's children playing in the yard, their laughter bright and free. Xander thought about the man he had been when he rode into Prescott 22 years ago, bitter and closed off, determined to spend his remaining years alone. That man would not recognize his life now, would not believe that so much joy and purpose could grow from broken promises and desperate fights, and choosing to care when every instinct screamed to walk away. But that man had not met Lorelei Reynolds, had not looked into her blue-green eyes and seen not just beauty but courage and determination, and a vision of what life could be if you were brave enough to fight for it. Had not learned that real strength was not about avoiding pain, but about choosing to hope despite it. "What are you thinking?" Lorelei asked, the same question she had asked so many times over their years together. "That I am grateful," Xander said simply. "For you, for our family, for every promise I broke and every risk I took. That coming to Arizona and meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if it did completely destroy my plans for peaceful isolation." "Some plans deserve to be destroyed," Lorelei said. "And for the record, I am grateful too. You saved me that day outside the Wells Fargo office. And you kept saving me, over and over, by choosing to stay and fight when you could have walked away. You are my hero, Xander Callahan. My surprising, stubborn, wonderful hero." He turned to kiss her properly. This woman who had made him break every promise, who had given him a life worth living and a cause worth fighting for. The kiss was tender and familiar, the kiss of two people who had chosen each other again and again across years and challenges, who had built something that would outlast them both in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward. The sun finished setting, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, lamps were being lit. Soon they would go in for dinner, surrounded by family and noise and the beautiful chaos of a life well lived. But for now, they sat together on the porch, holding hands, watching the desert sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from broken promises and desperate courage. Xander Callahan had come to Arizona to escape women and war both, to live out his days in isolation and safety. Instead, he had found Lorelei Reynolds, who made him break every vow he had ever made to himself. And in breaking those promises, he had found not destruction but redemption, not loss but gain, not the end of his story but its true beginning. It was more than he had ever hoped for, more than he had believed possible. And as he sat with his wife on that porch, listening to the sounds of his family and feeling the peace that came from a life lived with purpose and love, Xander knew with absolute certainty that he would not change a single thing. Every broken promise had been worth it. Every risk had paid off beyond measure. He had sworn off women and war both. Lorelei had made him break those promises and every other one he had made, and in doing so she had given him everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, home. She had given him a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving behind. And that, Xander thought as he kissed his wife under the emerging stars, was worth more than all the promises in the world.